People say they want to end racism without offering a solution. The solution is to pretend there's no such thing as race, and that's actually the truth. Details today on The 10th Man. Anywhere you look, you'll find signs and banners saying, "End racism." If we really want to do that, let's just stop talking about race. It's simple and it's scientific because there's no such thing as race. A person who imagines that the world is racist will go looking for racism and he'll find it. It isn't difficult because racism is both sides of the same coin. For example, before the big real estate bubble of 2008, politicians complained that deserving black people were being denied mortgages. There was some truth to that with a historical practice called redlining a century ago, but as the real estate bubble grew, poorer people who should not have qualified for mortgages received them anyway, and when the bubble burst, they couldn't pay the loans back. Suddenly, as black people got to have the experience of losing all their equity while still owing a mortgage, politicians then said that the black people were victims of predatory loan practices. Blacks don't get the loans they do deserve. Blacks do get the loans they don't deserve. Both situations are called racist. The media will take some disease and say it's not fair that black people die of this disease disproportionately to white people. Their math is wrong since everybody dies and has some cause of death. If the white people are dying in disproportionately low numbers of one disease, then they must be dying in disproportionately high numbers of other diseases. There's a long list of diseases that mostly affect white people, but you never hear of them, and you don't hear white people complaining about racism regarding them. Unfortunately, what we do hear is cries of racism because of elderly white women getting osteoporosis treatment more often than black women because the disease more often affects them. Be careful what you wish for. Whites will gladly trade you their Parkinson's and Alzheimer's for your diabetes. There are many other areas where people look for racism. Whether we're talking about home mortgages or disease, college attendance, welfare participation, or prison, all these issues should be discussed using science, logic, and law, leaving race out of it. Why? Because race does not even exist and everybody knows it, even the United Nations. After the UN was created in 1945, it immediately began work on the race issues which had come to light during World War II. In 1948, the UN committee UNESCO issued a statement saying, "There is no such thing as race." They said race is not a biological phenomenon, but a social myth. There's no such thing as race, according to the UN. What about science? The American Anthropological Association says human populations are not biologically distinct. They go on to say there is more variation within the traditional races than between them. So that means that if you took any two Asian babies, they're probably more different from each other than from any black or white baby. So, anthropologists do not see race. Biologists agree, saying there's no race gene or genetic marker of any kind that distinguishes the so-called races. What we call race is just our looks, and appearances mean very little. Chimpanzees, for example, all look alike, yet there's more genetic variation among chimps than there is among all humans. We only look different as adaptations to where we live, like long-haired ponies in Scotland versus short-haired horses in Arabia. Speaking of equines, if there were different races among us, then people would have trouble breeding just as horses and donkeys do. A mule is a cross between a donkey and a horse. You can cross a donkey with a horse and produce a mule, but that mule is sterile itself and incapable of reproduction. Have you ever heard of a mixed-race child growing up to be sterile? Of course not, because there's no such thing as race. Sociologists say that race groups people together just for sharing traits that a society believes to be socially significant. If a society believes a given characteristic is significant, then it becomes significant. It's a belief, not a fact. It's right there in the definition by sociologists. Scientific American in 2016 argued for phasing out the terminology of race based on all these reasons. As common as this knowledge is, why don't we teach this and follow it? People don't follow it because they can use race to exert power over other people. One sociology paper from 2016 says, dominant groups in society have shaped racial categories in order to maintain systems of power. 200 years ago, just as science started telling us we are all the same, people used race to defend first slavery and then Jim Crow laws. Nowadays, when we should all know better, they use race to categorize blacks as helpless, marginal people and to demonize whites as supremacists. There will always be people who embrace any false philosophy if it will either enrich them or increase their self-esteem, even if it hurts people. For example, National Public Radio ran a story claiming that more black children than white suffer from sickle cell disease, using race to raise awareness of a possible penicillin shortage. Now, a white racist might complain that the black children are using up all the penicillin, but NPR is into black racism, so they went the other direction and got the science all wrong. You're not more likely to have sickle cell disease because you are black versus white. You're more likely to have sickle cell if your ancestors come from an area with high presence of malaria. Sickle cell is a reaction to the presence of malaria, not your skin color. It's more environment than heredity. Moreover, you must get the gene from both parents in order to manifest the disorder. The more we mix races, the less likely sickle cell becomes, which just proves that ignoring race makes the world a better place. Even Hollywood knows that there's no such thing as race. The same year the United Nations issued its statement on race, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave 3 Oscars, including Best Picture, to the movie containing this clip.
I'm doing a series for him on anti-Semitism.
For or against? You see, my young friends, I have no religion, so I'm not Jewish by religion. Further, I am a scientist, so I must rely on science, which tells me I'm not Jewish by race, since there's no such thing as a distinct Jewish race. There's not even such a thing as a Jewish type. I will simply go forth and state flatly, I'm not a Jew. Or with my face, that becomes not an evasion, but a new principle. A scientific principle.
For a scientific age.
Precisely. There must be millions of people nowadays who are religious only in the vaguest sense. I've often wondered why the Jewish ones among them still go on calling themselves Jews. Because the world still makes it an advantage not to be one.
That clip was from Gentleman's Agreement, a 1947 film directed by Elia Kazan and based on Laura Z. Hobson's best-selling book of the same name. If race doesn't matter, then culture does. Ben Shapiro has pointed out that anyone in America can be successful if he finishes high school, waits until age 21 to get married and have babies, and gets a job. He's right, you know. Although it's often said that 70% of the men in prison are black, which is true, but the number of men in prison, black or white, who are high school dropouts is 80%. And most by far are from single mother households. Those are culture problems, not race problems. But just like the sociologist said, the dominant groups in society use racism to tell black boys they are going to die or go to prison before they grow up. Who is the real friend to the young black male? The one telling him the white man is pulling the levers? The one telling him there is no hope based on skin color? Is that person his friend? Or is his friend the people who say he can finish school, get a job, and have the American dream? The ones who follow the science and treat every individual as an individual based on the content of his character. Telling the young man he can succeed on his own is the scientific message, the kind message, and the moral one, because race doesn't exist.